Hi there, my name is Andy Farquharson and I'm your host on Alternative Exit,
the podcast dedicated to educating small business owners about the possibilities, benefits and challenges of transitioning to an employee ownership model. Did you know that there are over 200 million SMEs around the globe with an owner that will be retiring within the next 10 years? Many of these owners will never actually find a buyer for their business, forcing them to close their doors, wreaking havoc on their employees and the communities. There is an alternative. This show will explore different forms of employee ownership and the best practices for a successful transition. Each episode is going to feature interviews with experts on employee ownership, business owners who've successfully made the transition, and consultants who've helped facilitate these changes.
Okay, now let's get on with the show.
Hello, listeners, and welcome back to the Alternative Exit. Today's guest is Noelle Lentz. She is the CEO, co-founder, and managing director of Allivate Impact Capital, an impact investing firm that elevates communities, alleviates poverty, and activates entrepreneurial ecosystems. So Noelle brings a deep experience across sort of mission-driven finance and impact investing and strategy across multiple different fields there. And her team recently launched the Allivate Employee Ownership Fund, which we're really excited to dive into today because look, it's capital that's designed specifically to help business owners transition into employee ownership, a topic I know that's very dear to many of your hearts. And so, Noelle, welcome to the Alternative Exit.
Thank you, Andy. It's a pleasure to join you today.
It's awesome. So, like, you've had an amazing career that's sort of gone and traveled over so many different areas, go across impact investing, community finance, employee ownership. I mean, what initially drew you to the space?
Yeah, it's a good question. You know, when I always knew I wanted to do mission-driven work, and I originally thought I wanted to do international development, and quickly learned that that same skill set can and should be applied in my own backyard. I'm
Yeah.
from just outside of Philadelphia, and there's vast amounts of not just income inequality, but wealth inequality. I found my way into the community development finance space, and a lot of the work I do is mobilizing CRA motivated capital. For the listeners who aren't
CRA?
familiar, yeah, the Community Reinvestment Act is something
Okay.
here in the U.S. that was passed in the 70s in response to redlining, because a lot of
Yeah.
this inequality that you see is a result of banks not making lending and investing available in all of the places where it takes deposits. So
Mhm.
I have the pleasure of working with banks to help fulfill that obligation, but more so above and beyond a compliance obligation, I think you'll see more banks starting to see it as a strategic business line to invest in low and moderate income communities and make sure that those communities have all of the same needs and opportunities.
Okay, very cool. So, I, I mean, that's something that I see a lot. So that sort of gap that you talked about, like, and need to be able to provide that type of support and achieve that same mission in your own backyard. I mean, it's something we see here in Europe a lot. Like, there's a lot of impact investing, especially social impact investing, that goes across to international borders where people see
Yeah.
it as a big need, but they tend to overlook what's in their neighborhood. I mean, why do you think that is?
Yeah, from the investing space, I feel like in the US domestic community development finance industry, we have a lot of players that have been doing wonderful work for many decades. But there's been this disconnect between, I would say, tapping the broader capital markets. And so
Mhm.
sometimes I feel like it's a product mismatch where there may be people who go to their advisors and say, I want to have an impact, and yet there's not that many products readily available. So I'm optimistic that our industry continues to mature. I have the pleasure of serving as the CEO of Allivate Impact Capital, and our goal is launching impact funds across asset classes. But also as just someone who cares about the growth of this industry, I think the more we connect people who are actually deploying capital in their local communities with those who are managing portfolios for high net worth individuals, family offices, we'll be able to really maximize our impact.
Yeah, awesome. Look, I want to dive into sort of how you're helping people to maximize their portfolios and how you deal with impact investors a little bit later. But beforehand, like, what like you talked about the sort of this broad mix of sort of obviously mission driven has been sort of the core parts, but how did that shape the founding of Allivate Capital?
Yeah, so I lead, as I mentioned, CRA investing for a bank. And as I mentioned, a lot of banks have taken this shift from seeing CRA as just something that they have to do as a compliance obligation to a
Mm.
strategic business line. And that certainly was the case for our bank. We were bumping up on our regulatory limits of how much of this type of equity investing you could do. So we pitched the concept of why not create an off balance sheet subsidiary? It sits under the bank holding company next to the bank. And now we're actually able to manage funds as a GP ourselves and bring in
Mhm.
additional limited partners. So it's not just our bank's balance sheet that we're mobilizing, but other banks, foundations, individuals who care about this type of work.
Okay, fantastic. And so is it just, I mean, we talked about sort of the Allivate Employee Ownership Fund. Do you have any other funds that you guys have launched?
We do. We have a high impact commercial real estate fund. It's actually an
Mhm.
opportunity zone fund, which is a tax advantage fund. It invests in things like affordable housing or mixed income, mixed use properties, maybe anchored by a community facility or a grocery store or a federally qualified healthcare center. And then we also have a growth equity fund for lower middle market companies where we provide not just the growth equity, but connections to key corporate clients like your Walmarts and Johnsons of the world that can help them scale to the next level.
Okay, really cool. Do you ever see, I mean, do you ever, I mean, there's probably some challenges of investing both from the real estate fund and the employee ownership fund, but do you ever see sort of a need to think about sort of investing across real estate as well when you're looking at your employee ownership investments?
Yeah, the employee ownership strategy is a newer one for us.
Mhm.
Private credit, unlike our other ones, which are private equity. But we really entered the employee ownership space because our bank is an employee owned bank. Our largest
Okay.
shareholder is our ESOP. So we've seen firsthand the ways that employee ownership can really boost employee morale and productivity and retention and all the things when you're not just coming to work to, check your time card and then clock out. You're really thinking like an owner and contributing to not just the company's bottom line, but your own bottom line. So that one's a bit different
Mhm.
than the opportunity zone funds, but they're all in line with this mission that you mentioned early in the podcast around alleviating poverty, elevating communities, activating entrepreneurial ecosystem.
Now, you did just drop something there, which is a little bit new to me. Opportunity zone funds. What do you mean by opportunity zones?
Yeah, so that's something unique here in the U.S. tax code
Okay.
that just got extended as a permanent program under the Trump administration. But essentially, it's trying to encourage people to invest capital in these communities that have been termed opportunity zones. Each governor can select the communities, but for the vast majority, you'll see they are low and moderate income communities. So it's really
Mhm.
trying to drive capital there. Our thesis goes a step further. The program doesn't have any built in impact reporting requirements. So we really try to operationalize our impact goals through a social impact advisory board and adopting an industry best practice framework to really make sure that the capital that's being invested in these communities is benefiting long term residents and not just displacing those residents. That's why you'll see a lot of emphasis around affordable housing and what we're doing.
Yeah. Okay. One of the things that sort of came up trying to create products that sit alongside the existing set out there for investors. How do you think about positioning of impact investing in a world where a lot of the times it has been seen by many investors as something that is concessionary or may not deliver the type of returns
Yeah.
that they see? Yeah. I mean, how do you think about that?
Yeah, I mean, we're really passionate about the fact that you can have impact and risk adjusted market rate returns together, that impact doesn't necessitate concessionary returns. Now, there
Yeah.
are some investors who, of course, are impact first and they're going to put in that catalytic capital. I think this is a great role for philanthropy where they can take that risk. But I often say, with all the problems that we see, I'm a person of faith and I believe we serve a God of abundance. And so I believe there's enough capital to solve these problems. But oftentimes I think it's a risk appetite issue. And so the more research that comes out, kind of demystifying or debunking this idea that impact means concessionary, the better. And I think if you're
Yep.
looking over the long term, it's part of why I love working for a privately owned, employee owned bank. We don't have to be so beholden to quarterly returns. We really
Mhm.
can be more long term thinking because that's where I think you'll see an impact investing strategy is as rigorous as a non impact investing strategy. It just has another risk mitigation lens towards long term things like, environmental impact or societal impact, I think you see that these days. What happens when people don't feel like they have agency or, are disengaged? That
Yeah.
ultimately hurts the society long term too. So I'm of the mind that impact is not sort of fluffy. It requires a whole other set of rigor in our impact management.
Yeah. How much education needs to go into educating investors about how this impact is a genuine risk mitigation strategy for them as part of their investment?
Yeah, the education is huge. And I personally, I'm an internal optimist, but I am encouraged by the fact that so many MBA programs have impact investing focus areas now that are oversubscribed. We at Allivate brought on a team of an MBA cohort from the Duke Fuqua School of Business, and they put together an impact measurement and management framework for our new employee ownership strategy. That gave them hands on experience. It gave us the opportunity to not just pour into the next generation of impact investors, but get additional support on our lean team here. And so I think that's encouraging. But I will say where my concern comes in is this pendulum that you see with changing political administrations. I had a call with someone when we were pitching our Opportunity Zone real estate fund, a state, and the state
Mhm.
said, if your fund deck says DEI or ESG, we have to hang up the phone. So this is very risky, right? Whereas before you'd see all the large funds, all of them coming out with ESG funds because it was
Yeah.
very in vogue. So I'm always looking for who are the true players that really care about this work, even when it's not popular.
Mhm. Well, I suppose that also, goes to the point of making sure it stacks up from an investment perspective. As saying it doesn't need to be concessionary. Like, this is going to deliver market rate returns. Sure, we can control and find all the references to ESG and get rid of those, but it's still going to be an attractive investment.
Yeah, and it's partly why I loved pitching the Opportunity Zone Fund because oftentimes I get frustrated in impact investing circles. It's like we're all preaching at the same choir we've been meeting with for 10 years or more. But with the Opportunity Zone funds, we did get some investors come to the table just because they were interested in the tax benefits.
Yeah.
But then they learned, oh, I can have this type of meaningful impact in my community with the same types of returns from a non-impact fund. So I have met managers that specifically and intentionally leave out any reference to a impact thesis um, because they want to lead with the financial returns, which are just as competitive.
Yeah. Yeah, I find sometimes I find it's a funny world, like in my very, very short amount of time that people are really looking to be able to, especially sort of, portfolio managers, people make that they're wanting to make these really rational decisions before emotionally connecting with them later, which seems to be the opposite of how like most of us do make decisions, which is sort of via that emotional connection.
Yeah, and increasingly you're seeing research around this great wealth transfer that will happen as baby boomers, and this plays into the employee ownership conversation as well. But just from a wealth
Mm.
management perspective, women we know tend to outlive men, and women, when surveyed, and millennials, in fact, are far more likely to want to align their investments with their values. So I
Mhm.
think we'll really start to see the needle move when more advisors are hearing about this as client demand, right?
Yeah.
Because it's one thing to say, I want to educate myself because this is a good thing to do, but it's not just a moral imperative, it's an economic imperative when your clients start demanding.
Yeah. Well, yeah, let's hope there is more demand coming. That'll be great. So, you alluded to just a little bit earlier that like you've got this sort of newly formed fund, which has really got this strategy around so that the employee ownership transition. What is the strategy?
Yeah, so for us, we had been hearing we're an employee owned firm and our bank does senior debt for ESOP conversions. So if a
Mhm.
founder, wants to sell their business to their employees, they can do so through an ESOP conversion, which is typically seller note and senior debt finance. But
Yeah.
what we learned through doing this from the bank side is that oftentimes the seller doesn't want to put up that large seller note, right? So we created this fund to introduce a sub debt tranche. So essentially, the seller can still sell their company to their employee, but get the liquidity event that they may be desiring at retirement. And so for us, from our impact thesis, it's really about, of course, wealth building through employee ownership, but also preserving jobs in these communities because there's often a focus on job creation, but Job preservation is just as important. And if we see
Yeah.
these companies either go out of business or get acquired by private equity, and the first thing that happens is downsizing the team, that's risky. So we're quite passionate about this and really just entering the market after observing the market for a while, but testing with a proof of concept fund, which is smaller, with the desire to do a larger fund in the future.
Okay. I'd love to sort of chat like a little bit more on the LP side and then diving into a little bit more as to sort of the types of investments you'd like to make.
Mhm.
Um, you mentioned that this is a private credit, like, and you're working in that a sub debt tranche. But what type of returns are you looking to offer your investors and timeframes?
Yeah, we're targeting a 15% return, and that's really an interest only, for the borrower up front, but then some warrants on the back end.
Okay.
So we're really trying to make sure we're not over leveraging the company. That's important, and then placing some strategic board members to really help them get to that next level of growth.
Okay. And okay, so then we get to the exciting part of like, what type of companies are you looking to make investments? Like, what size? Is there any particular types of industries that you're focused on?
Yeah, we're really industry agnostic because we do have this Community Reinvestment Act motivated capital. We are looking to serve low and moderate income individuals. So the majority of the employee base should be that. Of
Yeah.
course, we look for things like economic mobility and improvements in job quality. But for example, we wouldn't finance an investment bank becoming an ESOP, right? But we're industry agnostic. Ideally, 40 plus employees, 1 to 10 million of EBITDA is really what we're targeting.
Okay. Well, I mean, that's on the smaller side
Right.
compared to many other ESOP companies. How are you
Yeah.
able to execute on that without sort of being overly burdensome for for the target company?
Yeah, so that's strategic because we feel like there's a market gap there, though we think the impact of the employee ownership space is really there's a high potential there with smaller companies. So we want to fill that gap, and again, by working with the portfolio companies to help really scale, we're looking for companies that are poised for scale and
Okay.
helping them through the management transition. So of course, we want the sellers engaged over the short term. But longer term, we are looking at some opportunities to combine employee ownership and entrepreneurship through acquisition. So placing a really skilled manager or C-suite type person to fill that gap that the exiting founder would leave.
Yeah. Yeah, and mention you want these companies to be poised for scale. I mean, that's are you looking for them to be like acquisitive, and would you be providing additional finance to help with those types of activities to broaden the amount of employees that are covered under those ESOPs?
That's certainly one way they could scale, and we would be open to that. But, sometimes it's just moving into a new geographic market or launching a complementary business service. So we would help them think through all of those things. But again, we're looking to set the company up for success. So it has to have the right narrative and be the right time in the company's history for our type of capital to come in.
Okay. Look, a lot of the talk you hear about ETA or that space is this is an amazing opportunity for these sort of either MBA students or people coming out of corporate life. They're one chance to have a big swing and get a big return. Like obviously, this presents a really different option for someone. Like this isn't the opportunity for them to be able to go on their own path and build their own company, but rather sort of help broaden that out. I mean, how do you see that sort of positioning for your type of work with the other sort of all the other people promoting ETA out there in the world?
Yeah, there are these search funds that are promoting ETA and placing these skilled MBAs in companies. For us, the combination with employee ownership, I think, is that sweet spot where we can really maximize the impact. Because again, the focus for a long time in economic development circles was job creation, as it should
Yeah.
be, but job preservation is just as important. So if you can preserve a culture and bring in the missing skill set that the exiting founder would leave, it's really kind of a cool puzzle piece to come together. I think one place for caution is to make sure that that incoming um, leader really assimilates well with the existing culture. And so
Mhm.
I think that has to be done very thoughtfully, but also with an opportunity for employees. You're not just employees anymore. Now you're owners. And what does that mean? And I think if that just gets done as part of a transaction on paper without the right intentional emphasis with the employee base, there's a lot of missed opportunity there. So you really do have to approach this in some unique ways if you want to have the maximum benefits of the transaction.
Yeah. Well, I also think it does the way that you're sort of talking about this and how you're engaging with these companies. It's presenting a really unique opportunity for searchers out there to be able to sort of step in straight into to having a really aligned mission while still getting the opportunities for them to be able to continue their professional development journey.
Absolutely. Yeah, we just recently closed a transaction in Atlanta with a company named Art. And we had an excellent manager, Jeff Easterling, move in. And so this is one example where his skill set, you know, with a Naval Academy background and just a lot of technical skills alongside the creative industry that's creating interior signage. It's a nice complement of skill sets. And we're really excited to see what that company will continue to do now that they're 100% employee owned.
Yeah, we had a great old conversation with Jeff, and I'll put a link to that episode in the show notes. But yeah, he really talked about that mission being one of the key drivers for him. Right? He did have other opportunities. There were other search funds that he was sort of reaching out and engaging. But yeah, having a mission straight out of the gate was a huge win, and sort of one of the key things he was looking for.
Yeah. And, it's interesting because not everybody has an entrepreneurial DNA in them, yet employee ownership allows people to get the benefits of working hard day in and day out for a company. I like to tell this personal story about why employee ownership is so important to me. I was raised in an entrepreneurial home. My father started his CPA and ultimately wealth management firm out of a row home in Northeast Philly. And my
Yeah.
older brother would hear my mom, because she was the one that answered the phone, saying St. Clair and Associates. He went to kindergarten and said, "My name's Billy St. Clair and Associates," which is funny. Like that was the environment I grew up in, right? Building a business out of a home. Well, my father sold his company a few years ago and did not convert it to employee ownership. And, when you pour your heart and soul into building something, it does become like your baby, right? And so
Mhm.
while it was a good payday for him to sell his company to a much larger firm, you see a bit of that culture die. He started a company because his father always told him, "My biggest advice for you is work for yourself." Now, my grandfather was a butcher, went to work, worked hard day in and day out. But at the end of the day, he got a paycheck, but not much opportunity for wealth accumulation. So he wanted to see his son have that opportunity. In my mind, employee ownership is a way you can have that work ethic. Maybe you don't want to have your living room turn into, your budding business, and that's not the type of lifestyle you want. That's fine. But I am very encouraged by an economy that can reward all people for the work that they put in and create opportunities for wealth building, because that changes generations, right? That's being
Yeah.
able to send a child to school or care for an aging parent. It's very tangible things. And you see the research about the amount of retirement funds employees of employee owned businesses have compared to non. So again, from an impact investing systemic risk view, I think employee ownership is good for all of us and for more thriving local communities and macro economies.
Yeah, very cool. So, you did talk about how like you do play a little bit more of an active role than say some potentially what some other debt funds might do, like in helping these companies to adapt to the employee ownership culture. I mean, what do you think are the key things that a company needs to do to adjust to and to being employee owned?
Yeah, I mean, again, I think this narrative around you are not just an employee, you are an owner. That's huge for us at our bank. Our CEO and chairman is always talking to even our frontline retail team about what is our price per share. Knowing these things is really important so that you're all kind of rowing in the same direction towards the same goal, and you start to internalize the fact that the success of the business is directly tied to my own success. So I think having those conversations, normalizing those conversations, and bringing transparency to the company's financials.
Yeah.
Not every company is going to share that with all employees, but if these are employee owners, I believe they should know, and I think it aligns incentives, right? So creating a pride around being an owner goes a long way, but it doesn't just happen because you penciled a transaction. It takes some intentionality around messaging and engagement and transparency.
Yeah, I love that story about from the CEO just really sort of normalizing and creating that common language about what ownership means
Right.
and highlighting it down to that. I mean, sort of that financial understanding of the business. I mean, what? a big bank, like you talk about to your bank, might be, I don't know, might be in a better position to be able to invest in that kind of in that kind of education and training for the workers. How do you think about that when you're looking at these smaller, once $10 million revenue companies where they may not have as much money in learning and allocated to learning and development, but they do need to make this cultural change?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's this great emerging ecosystem around employee ownership or employee ownership lens investing. And I've been encouraged by people who are willing to share their toolkits, from the ownership works of the world who are working with private equity on, employee ownership like strategies, to the Allison Legan and her work at the Ownership Capital Lab. I think people are putting out best practices. Certainly, APIS and Heritage have been leaders in this space, and they've been great mentors for us as we're navigating. But each of the states having centers for employee ownership, they're a great resource. We're looking forward to engaging more with the Texas Center for Employee Ownership. Um, just how do we convene local business owners to think about employee ownership? But then to your point, for employee-owned companies, how do we resource them with some best practices?
Yeah, there's so many amazing resources to lean on over there in the States. It's, yeah, you guys are spoiled for choice, and options, which is great.
Yeah, it's certainly emerging. The research shows you haven't really seen a big uptick in the amount of ESOPs created, and most people will say that's twofold. It's the lack of capital. So we're hopeful that strategies like ours and others will help so that sellers have choices. They don't have to put out a large seller note if that's not aligned with what they want for their retirement.
Mhm.
But also the lack of education. And so the education is a huge part of it. We have in the US, more than 50% of business owners are age 55 and older. Are they even thinking when they talk to their advisors that employee ownership is a path for them? So thank you for what you're doing, Andy, through your podcast, educating people. It's really needed.
Yeah, it's well, that's the goal. Like, we really wanna be able to solve that education side, but I think that I said the capital piece is really tough. There's not many owners who are willing to be able to forego that sort of potential, like 50%, like, to seller finance that. So that's obviously a huge gap that you're filling. As you think about your fund, like, you talk this about being a smaller fund that sort of is looking to be able to drive that. I mean, when are you gonna be able to see enough success for you to be able to start raising to that second fund? And what does the size of that fund look like?
Yeah, so this first fund is just $10 million. It's a single LP fund. Our bank put up the money to really test the market and
Gotcha.
make sure the demand is there. But the ultimate goal would be to go for an SBIC. That's a small business investment company license with
Mhm.
the US Small Business Administration. And what that does is two great benefits. One, we could raise 50 million of equity and leverage two times that in low cost capital. So it
Right.
significantly brings down the cost of capital for us,
Yeah.
increase the IRR for investors. But from an impact investing perspective, from an impact thesis perspective, it could triple the amount of employee owners we create, right? Because we'd
Yeah.
raise 50 million, we'd have a $150 million fund. Also meaningfully, that SBIC license designation would make it much easier for us to raise from bank LPs for a number of
Mhm.
reasons. My bank is trying to be really a leader in impact investing, so we're willing to go sort of above and beyond and tackle some regulatory hurdles to get into funds that are not designated SBIC. But once you have that SBIC designation, it's an easy check the box for bank CRA obligations. So then we'd have much larger bank LPs. And I'm passionate about this because all banks have this CRA obligation. And I feel that far too many are doing the bare minimum,
Yeah.
purchasing qualified capital market transactions that aren't really moving the needle in community. So I'm quite committed to try to get more CRA capital off the sidelines into meaningful strategies through Allivate managed funds or others. I'm always happy to introduce new and innovative funds to banks that are looking to get involved.
Okay. Are there any other like EO focused funds with that SBIC license?
There's one, Mosaic Capital. They're doing great work. But other than them, it's really an untapped market. It is a high barrier to entry around track record and things like that, which is tough with a niche emerging market like employee ownership. You're not going to find many people with 10-year track records and exits if it's an industry we're trying to grow. But there's a great policy effort here in the US being led by a group called Lafayette Square to create an SBIC like vehicle specifically for employee ownership funds. It would sit with the Department of Commerce. And so I really applaud their policy efforts. I think that would unlock a lot of capital for employee ownership. And again, we know that would have such an impact on our economy, even stabilizing supply chains and things like that. So it is one area where here in the US, employee ownership continues to receive
Yeah.
bipartisan support. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. It's one of those things that's just got zero downsides.
Yeah.
There, there is, it's got to be bipartisan support.
Yeah.
Y- so you talked a little bit earlier about the type of companies that you're looking for. What's like, and also some of the geographies. I mean, how are people engaging you, or how are you looking for these opportunities? Are you partnering with particular sort of searches or search funds to be able to drive this?
We're really trying to network into the advisors, the CPAs, the people that these founders are already going to talk about their succession
Right.
planning. We're also trying to, partner more with the Centers for Employee Ownership and otherwise because it has to be part of the conversation early on. You don't just convert to an ESOP overnight. There's steps along the way, like a feasibility study and getting a trustee. And so working
Mhm.
with those professionals who are very much embedded in this space is where I feel like we'll have the most success.
Okay, very cool. Now, this has been an amazing introduction to the work that you do and the impact you're
Thank
looking to
you.
provide. But before we go, I like to ask all of our participants a quick, like, fast round of 3 questions, and you just offer a quick response. How does that sound?
Sounds good. I'm
Okay.
ready.
All right. So, who is the leader that you most admire in employee ownership?
Listen again.
Okay, fantastic. I love Alison. She's another guest, prior guest on the pod, and so we'll include the link to her episode. What is your favorite resource on employee ownership?
The Rutgers research. Lots of great research coming out of Rutgers, which is right near me here in New Jersey.
Very cool. And then finally, what is the one thing you'd say to a business owner who's sitting on the fence regarding a transition to employee ownership?
Yeah, again, I know from my own family's experience, this is not just a payday, this is your legacy. And if there's a way to preserve that legacy, empower your employees, and still get the financial return that you've worked so hard for your whole career, it's really worth considering.
Okay. Noelle, thank you so much for your time. Where can people go if they'd like to learn more about you and Allivate?
Our website is allivate.com. It's Allivate. Everybody's always asking, what does Allivate mean? Again, it's just the combination of our mission, which is elevating communities, alleviating poverty, and activating entrepreneurial ecosystems. So we'd love to continue the conversation with anyone who's interested. And thanks again for the opportunity, Andy.
Yeah, cheers, Noelle. Thank you very much for your time, sharing your thoughts and leadership with us. Thanks for joining us on The Alternative Exit.
We hope you enjoyed this episode. If you want to continue learning about employee ownership as an alternative exit, head across to abettermonday.me for additional links and resources. You can also make sure to subscribe or follow along in your favorite podcast app and be sure to leave us a 5-star review.